So I know this video is outdated because they made an emergency ban list, but I got finished chained by work, so I didn't upload this back in October. And as I was drafting the next video in the series, I realized that if I don't upload this, it makes my next video kind of hard to understand. So I'm going to upload it anyways. So a lot of people are pretty upset about YCS Anaheim finals, and to be fair, I think it's pretty justifiable. It's unfortunate that the top cut ended up being a lot of non-games for a format that was heralded as a pretty good one, but that got me thinking about the legality of Floodgates, and what I'm realizing is that I'm pretty sure the justification for the legality of Floodgates is even weaker than most people think. To my understanding, the reasoning people use to explain why Floodgates deserve a place in the game is that they give an avenue for lower level players to defeat higher level players, and to some, that may already seem like nonsense because a game should be rewarding skill if it wants to have a sustainable player base, and players who play better should win more often. That's how every single competitive activity in the world functions. The other side of the argument is that the barrier to entry for current Yu-Gi-Oh! Is extremely high, which means if you start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, you will not win for a very long time, and that is extremely demoralizing for a new player. I think that is true, and it is also problematic because I think many people have a hard time sticking with an activity where they don't see any returns for a prolonged period of time. For example, I have a fighting game background. In fighting games, when you start, you will actually never win. I must have spent multiple years of my life losing, and I think that's partially why fighting games have a flaw in the genre where they are too skillful. And unlike card games or team-based games such as MOBAs or FPS games that involve a degree of luck when you win, there's nothing that helps bring lower players up during the learning phase, which means that the only players that stay with these games are the most mentally tenacious ones, so the player base ends up being small. In my opinion, that is one of the three main reasons why fighting games, despite being so excellent, are never big, and why some of the games that the broader community tends to agree are extremely well designed tend to have pathetic numbers. The problem with all this logic is that it only works if low-level players actually like Floodgates, and I'm actually pretty sure the reality is the opposite. I've seen this commented a lot recently. Patrick Hoban made a tweet. Farfo was discussing this theory, and I'm not really sure what the original source for this reasoning is because personally, I think that this is an assumption that doesn't really reflect my experience interacting with players. It's just a very popular theory that I feel like has very weak support in reality. So I'm going to use some anecdotes now. Again, for my anecdotes, this is about my experience with locals in China. I'm not speaking for every single OCG player, but I think it's important to go over an OCG anecdote because it has been essentially confirmed by Steven Santoli on Josh's Genesys video that the OCG has influence over the TCG ban list. So if OCG players were potentially against Floodgates as well, then that could maybe give the TCG side some leeway to start being more liberal with their Floodgate bans. My personal experience is that the majority of low-level players hate Floodgates, to the point where players will see one flipped and then the term we use to describe them is disgusting. So players will actually ask their opponents, why are you playing such a disgusting card in your deck, or why are you playing such a disgusting deck? Now here's a cultural difference. But what determines how cool a deck is in OCG is significantly more affected by the artwork of a deck than in the TCG. For example, I would say, in general, Flandres is a deck that was largely considered lame by TCG players. Personally, after they banned Barrier Statue, I didn't really think there was a problem with anything except for Featherstorm, but in China, Flu was pretty much never considered a lame deck in the first place. And I thought that was very interesting because my initial guess was because of Maxi, but the reality is just that it's due to artwork. People just think that the birds are cute. And that's also why decks such as Purely and Runic are still so popular in locals today, even though if we're being realistic, Purely hasn't been relevant since Snake Eyes, and Lab maybe only have a couple of formats where it was kind of okay. In general, most decks in OCG are considered cool unless it's an extremely powerful tier 1 strategy like Senpai, but there is one exception, which is Runic. The reason this is so important is that Runic has art that OCG players should love. If you look at the art of a Runic card, I don't really want to explain why, but it has all the qualities that should make it a popular and beloved deck ignoring gameplay. However, it is pretty much universally hated because Runic Stun is the most prevalent build in the OCG, and that also extends to when you try to play Combo Runic, even though Combo Runic doesn't even have Floodgates to abuse this in the first place. Let's think about that for a second. Players in the OCG hate Floodgates so much that not even Hugin could overcome this hatred for the archetype in general. In my experience, the only players that either play Floodgate decks or like Floodgates are the mid-level players. The players that care about winning, but their technical play is approximately average, so they cannot consistently defeat the more skilled players. However, if we assume that the goal of Konami is player retention, then those mid-level players are already in too deep to Yu-Gi-Oh! To quit even if the Floodgates were universally banned. They just happen to play Floodgates because they are given the option. Another reason I think that this is true is that there are tournaments with special rules, and locally, I've entered tournaments that have banned all floodgates. In China, we have two different types of competitions, which are points competitions and entertainment competitions, or for fun competitions. For fun competitions are basically just free tournaments that anyone can enter, and they have their own rules. I used to enter for fun competitions a lot when I first returned to China, but I stopped because I'm degenerately competitive. However, when I first played in these, the special rules that were the most popular were no floodgates. They could have made rules like no meta, no snake eyes, no tenpai, but instead, no floodgates was the most popular special rule in my area at the time. So I'm still getting tenpai'd, but at least there's no heat wave. Now, I will say that there's an asterisk for some of these tournaments. For example, in one tournament, in final, I went second against Purely, and then he did first action D-Fissure, and I'm playing Lightsworn, and in my hand is Wolf Felice Recharge. So I had to ask, aren't all floodgates banned? But then the tournament organizer just said that some decks need floodgates to function. Personally, I'm pretty sure that Purely does not need Dimensional Fissure to function, but since it was just a for fun tournament, I'm not upset about it. I'm only mentioning it because I thought it was strange that an exception was permitted. The rules for these tournaments aren't extremely strict and completely enforced, but these tournaments are just more meant to be casual play sessions that just happen to have a bracket. So I've only seen this exception happen that one time, but I still think that the idea of no floodgate tournaments is overall good. These next 2 points aren't about the OCG, but rather other formats or forums, and this is something that Josh mentioned in his video, but Genesys pretty much made every floodgate unplayable by making them extremely expensive. To me, that kind of signals that the TCG side is already aware that most players probably do not like floodgates, and they're actually inclined to try to ban floodgates if given the opportunity. Master Duel is another example. Of the major formats, OCG, TCG, Master Duel, the one that hits stun decks by far the most is Master Duel, and I don't think that's unrelated to the fact that Master Duel has the highest number of casual players. Now, I understand that there's clearly an alternative cause for this that is unrelated to the number of casuals, which is that Master Duel is best of one. But I think both can be contributing factors. Stun is more powerful in the best of one, yes, that is true, which means that it demands more hits. But I think that having more casuals may incentivize Konami to hit stun than in other formats. I know that I'm making a big assumption here, but at worst you can just say that the implementation of harder stun hits in Master Duel is just proof that you can hit stun without losing massive amounts of players. My final anecdote about casuals hitting floodgates is actually related to responses on forums, and in this case I will be speaking about the TCG. I'm trying to word this as unoffensively as possible, but out of every single forum I can read, whether that be Chinese forums, Japanese forums, English forums, I would say English Reddit is probably the least reflective of reality. And what I mean by this is not based on card or deck analysis, things based on opinion, but rather things that are more falsifiable. So comments that do well on Reddit tend to have misinformation more frequently than other social media by either being extremely historically inaccurate or just by saying illegal concepts they can figure out don't work from reading cards. I'm not trying to insult people who use Reddit, but it's because of this misinformation that makes me think that the user base is more casual, and it is a very popular opinion on Reddit to say that all floodgates should be banned. So to me, that is actually another reason that suggests that most casual players do not enjoy floodgates. It's not the strongest reason. I have to make a couple of assumptions for this as well, but it's not just Reddit, it's not Master Duel, or OCG locals. It's everything together that leads me to believe that there are many casual, newer, or lower level players that don't love floodgates, and I have yet to find strong evidence of the contrary. The new floodgate lover player that only plays to D-Fissure top players seems more like a caricature to me than a common lived experience. Now, to be honest, I'm probably less harsh on floodgates than most players. I will never ever say that all floodgates are a mistake that should never have been printed, because floodgate type effects are not only in other card games, but in past Yu-Gi-Oh formats have an extremely strong expression of skill. However, in the context of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, where there is only one turn and floodgates have been begun to consistently floodgate the floodgate outs, there isn't really a coherent argument for the legality of floodgates strictly from a gameplay perspective. I'm just saying that I don't think that the lone player-based argument is that solid either, at least not based on my personal experience, and I might be missing something, but at the moment, I don't really understand why it wouldn't be realistic for them to just ban every single floodgate. If it's based on OCG approval, as other people are theorizing, it's not like the majority of OCG player base adores floodgates either. To end off, I just wanted to take some time to ask for feedback on this type of video because I'm thinking of making this the first part in a series of podcast type videos where I can talk a little bit less research and use more anecdotes that I have nowhere to put in more research videos. Mainly because I think that anecdotes are important, but also because it just saves me a lot of times on making videos about topics I care about if I just talk about my experience, because then I don't have to worry about spreading misinformation as opposed to something that would need more research. So if you have any ideas for names for the series or topics you would like to hear discussed, please let me know. And thank you for listening as always.